I've heard numerous horror stories about data. One of them is, hey guys, all my data is good data. The question is your data is a good data? If not, then how do we identify good data from the bad data? Welcome to the surreal world of data analytics, confusion, and confusion. Today, we're going to remove all the cobwebs and all the fallacies around good and bad data. To remove these cobwebs of doubts, we have with us a panel of speakers. Dr. Professor Pragati Rawat from United States of America. She is a think tank in public policy and she is a passionate about analytics. We have Eleni from Greece. She is regarded as who's who in analytics and she is regarded as an analytics champion from Greece. We have got analytics guru from Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, engineering Bashir Hashim. And of course, we have with us Abhijit. He is one of the most well-known face now in analytics, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. And so we're going to bust a lot of doubts and a lot of fallacies about good and bad data. Abhijit, your take.
Yes, sir. Now, let us begin by defining what is good and what is bad about data. And before we do that, we should know that there are two perspectives to it. One, there are some generic parameters on which we can say that whether the data is good or bad. The other perspective is the reference frame we are using. What immediately comes to my mind is whenever I clean my house, I find it extremely clean. My wife always has a different view. So in data also, the quality depends on for what purpose it is being used. And we must keep in mind that thing when we are deciding whether it's a good data or a bad data. Having said that, what I have done is I have jotted down a few parameters on which we can evaluate a data. Sandeep, you can have the first slide. I think you're muted, Sandeep. Perfect. So I won't say this is all that is there in data quality, but most of it gets covered. The first one is what I was talking about, how relevant is the data. So it might be a very, very good data, but if it is not relevant to me, it's as good as a garbage. So we need to discuss what does relevancy means in terms of data. The second parameter that we would be discussing in the panel is what is the completeness of the data. So whether the data is complete or not. The third one would be how valid is the data. So what we would be speaking is that is it authentic? So what is the source of the data? Can I trust the data? A lot of issues creep in because we get a data, we get excited because it looks good, but we don't know whether the source is correct or not, how validated is the source. For example, say if I get passport details of say 1,000 customers, extremely good data to have, but if the passport is not valid, then it is of no use to any of us. The fourth, Sandeep, I think we missed the slide. So the fourth one is the accuracy of the data. Now, accuracy is a very relative term. What may be very accurate for me may not be accurate for another department. So say if I'm talking about financial data, the accuracy of a financial data is very, very different for a marketing department vis-a-vis a financial department. The fifth, what is the timeliness of the data? So how old is the data? What is the time frame that the data consists of? And it is extremely dependent on what is the purpose of use of the data. The sixth is the formatting. Formatting is extremely important. And I remember one of the cases where we were trying to run a campaign and we were using a automated caller. And we had around 10,000 customers who had given us our phone numbers. And whatever we checked, the phone numbers were correct. But whenever the auto dialer used to dial it, it would show errors. So finally, we realized that it is not what the customer has given that is wrong. They have given two phone numbers with a slash in between, and the auto dialer was not picking it up. So we had a good data. We had, in fact, extra data, two phone numbers per customers. But because the format was not correct, it was not being used. And finally, Sandeep, again, we lost the slide.
There you
Is
go.
the consistency of the data. Consistency means the data should be of the same quality throughout. So say I have data coming in from 15 cities. If I have 4 cities which is sending me one kind of data and 4 cities other kind of data, I will not be able to use it for any analysis. Now, these are some of the parameters that came to my mind, and I would like to open it to the group about their views about individually these topics in relation to the organizations they work for or their experience in the market. Dr. Pragati, why don't you start? Because you have been using huge amounts of data in your analysis. Dr. Pragati, you're muted, I suppose.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Abhijit. So one of the things, as you were going through your various points on good and bad data, one thing that came to my mind is that the 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 characteristic of the data which is most important for an organization may vary from organization to organization. This is something I teach in MIS as well. Like where for an organization, timeliness of a data may be most important. So someone who is in disaster management, do they get the timely data? That may be most important rather than the security of the data. So security of the data was very important in the organization that I worked for, which was the government organization, where we had the data of the residents. So that is also an aspect of data quality. But in another organization, say disaster management, it would be something like timeliness of the data. They're not bothered about the security of the data. They want coverage of the data instead. On the contrary, they want everyone to be aware of a disaster that is coming by. So it may vary from organization to organization. That is one point that I wanted to mention here.
Perfect. Eleni, you have been using data for your campaigns for a long, long time. And I'm quite sure you would be facing a lot of issues about data quality. You have had fights with the IT department in terms of quality. So, what is it that you look for in a data when you say about a good data or a bad data?
Yes, exactly like this, Abhijit. So there are lots of things and relevant, as you said, but I can say specific things now to make it simpler. For example, when we launch a campaign, we want to reach the customer. So what do you need there in that point of time? You need for the customer to have correct mobile number for him or correct email address.
Perfect.
Because in the banking sectors there are policies in place, all the customers they have to give their mobile number. So a very high percentage of customers they had mobile number. Some of them they didn't have, but a small percentage. But yes, the mobile number goes in different formats. It may be with the dashes, it may be with a country code in front, though it may be without the country code in front. Then we do data. We do some analysis behind, and we find some ways the analytics team to bypass these issues and make sure the mobile number is the correct format before it goes to IVR to call the customer or to the agents to call the customer. So the contact details of the customer are very important when you have campaigns and you want to communicate to them. It may be something urgent for them. So for sure you have to make sure you have the contact details of the customer. Email addresses was a very big challenge in the banking sector that I had seen mainly, and in both banks, and in Greece and in Dubai that I was. Because the front line was not mandatory to ask the email address, the majority of the employees did not ask. So maybe good best scenario, a 50% of the customers to have email address. So then again, the campaigns department had to do some campaigns to reach the customers, and we make sure somehow we enter or we capture their email address so that we can communicate them through emails. One important was this. Second important was to have correct, very important for the banking sector, the financial sector, is to have Emirates ID correct, to have passport correct. These are regulations of the government here or from the central bank. So as a bank, you need to have these correct contact details personal details of the customer. You have to. It's regulation, so you have to follow some regulations. Also, some of these were outdated. Some passports expired. Some Emirates ID expired. Then again, the analytics department had to do some data analysis, proactively send, for example, communications to customers whose Emirates ID is going to expire the next month, inform them your Emirates ID is going to expire. Please come and update your Emirates ID, or your passport is going to expire, or your passport has already expired. We need to update it because this is the regulation of the country. So there are lots of things on the banking sector that either are good to have or you have to have good
Uh,
data
uh,
quality.
I have a question for you, Eleni. Is there a difference between quality of data that you are looking at and what a finance team or some other team would be looking at?
Yes, the marketing and the business, some there are overlap, but yes, there are. So the business and the sales department or the campaigns department will be more oriented on customers' contact details to reach them and try to cross-sell, for example, or on customers' products, how many customers we have, how many products they have, what transactions they have, all these things. On the other hand, the risk will check what are these customers, what are the transactions they do with their credit cards. Do they have any suspicious transaction? So overall, you need to have everything in place because different departments, the finance department will look more on the balances of the customers, their financial information. So we all
I got
need
it.
of something. So at the end, the bank needs to have everything there.
Absolutely. Dr. Bashir, I think I have got a very interesting candidate for a different perspective. Dr. Bashir actually is one of the advisors for Minister of Telecom. And we
Abhijit,
all know, yeah,
Abhijit, that's the
yes, sir.
engineering Bashir.
Sorry, Engineer Bashir is one of the advisors for Minister of Telecom, and Telecom is one department which I think creates the largest amount of data within any country. I would like to know, sir, that how is there any data definitions or quality parameters that you issue to the telecom providers in general to maintain the data quality?
Well, as already mentioned with both Elena and Dr. Pragati, data is extremely important to be categorized correctly. There are regulations that any customer that comes in needs to put his national ID number or Iqama number, which is the local registry number, his phone number, address, so on and so forth. But talking about data in particular, there are two core risks. One, making decision based on false information or false data, like what Eleni and Dr. Parati has already mentioned. The number is not formatted correctly, or the date of birth is not formatted correctly, the email address is not put in the right format, so on and so forth. And compliance to a specific set of rules. That's why whenever you go to a telecom company to get your phone number or get whatnot, you are forced to put in the area code, you are forced to put in the first 4 digits and the remaining phone number in 2 separate slots where you put in your number. Your date of birth, it's always a date, a month, and a year in 3 different slots to minimize the amount of variations that you have. The IP address is registered in a specific way. The frequency bandwidth is also registered in a specific way. At the end of the day, it all comes down to that one single point. If your system does not represent the real world, then how can you make accurate decisions? Data quality issues have research have shown that 60% of enterprise suffer from data quality issues. 70% of manufacturing orders contain poor quality data, which led to massive losses of $1.4 billion a year that companies have incurred because of those bad quality data or data quality issues. So forcing specific compliance and regulations to enter the data in the right format is mandatory in order to have the right data and the right analysis for that data with as much or as little as possible with errors and as much as possible with accuracy.
Perfect. So before I sum up the section, what we noticed is that there are two key points. One, a definition of good quality data is important, both at an organization level and at a user group level, which is the department level, because the quality may be very different for different perspectives. A finance department may not be interested in the customer contact information, whereas a sales department would be extremely important, concerned about the customer contact information. So there should be a generic rules or definitions for data quality at each level, at an organization and at a user group level. The second that we realize is, I don't think there is anything called a perfect data. That is one of the resources in the organization which is live, which is growing, which is breathing. So whatever data we have, you have to take it as the base quality and start using it. And as and when you start using it, you will keep figuring out what are the problems with the data from a usage perspective. And then you start putting in place corrective measures. But if you don't jump into the swimming pool, the swim will not happen. So most of the organizations, what I feel is definitely data quality is the issue, but it should not be a concern to stop your progress on data usage. So you start doing it and then figure out where it is. I think the other important point that we would be discussing here is, if it is a bad quality data or a good quality data, where is the data coming from? And I would request Dr. Pragati to give an overview of the next discussion topic.
Yeah, thank you, Abhijit. Sandeep, can you pull up my slide, please? On sources of data dirt. No, the other one. Yes, thank you. Yeah, so the first portion of the slide shows some of the sources from where we can get bad quality data, or that can result in bad quality data. Now, there are various sources for data dirt, and by data dirt, I mean like dirty data, basically inaccurate data or incomplete data or duplicate data. So those kind of issues. Now, I'm going to touch base on some of these sources. So as one can understand, there are user errors definitely, and the more complex the processes get, the more prone they are to user errors. However, what I have seen in my experience, that most of these user errors could have been avoided if there was the slide is gone, I think. So if there was there were sufficient resources provided to the users. So by resources, I mean time constraints, manpower, appropriate tools. So usually, organizations, they want everything immediately, and that does not provide sufficient time for preparation, designing, and testing. And that results in poor quality data. Apart from that, what I have observed is there are not clear standards and guidelines, like who will be collecting what data. So who's going to be the data author, what data will be collected, the definitions of various concepts. So for example, lead time. So what would you consider as lead time? The time from when you ordered till it was received at the dock, or till it was received on your premises, or till the time it cleared the quality check. So those kind of definitions. So for example, when we were working with the government, we are collecting data for residents or citizens. What is the difference between residents? Who would be considered a resident? Is it different from citizen? So those kind of definitions need to be provided clearly. And then, of course, there's lack of training of the manpower. Again, it's related to resource constraints. what I have also observed in my experience, because most of our data was being collected by third party. So if your data collection is through other sources, there may be, concerns related to profit making or short-sightedness, short-term profit making, which can lead to your data collectors to be providing you with poor quality data, so incomplete data, inaccurate data. So that can also play a part in data dirt. And then there are older systems that have not been upgraded. One has to realize that data management is a continuous process, and data needs to be updated. It gets obsolete very fast. Data decay is a problem that many organizations face on a continuous basis. For example, the organization that I was working for, one of the MNCs, if the partner, the part that is being put in your product, if it gets obsolete and you don't get the data on time, if that is not updated in your system, you'll face supply chain issues then. And your entire manufacturing may get stalled. And then because nowadays there's this concept of big data, and of course the data would not be in single databases. It will be available in multiple databases. So how you link your data, that data linkage is also very important, and that results in a lot of data errors as well. Now, what can we do to address these kind of issues? So some of the things that I've mentioned here is related to policies and processes. As I mentioned, concepts need to be clarified, defined clearly. You have business rules, at what who will be collecting what data, at what frequency that data will be updated. Those kind of rules hardly 30% of the organizations have any data quality strategy as per a Harvard Business Review study. So that means many of the organizations do not even have a data quality strategy put in place. So once you have a data quality strategy, you can then design a dashboard based on your key performance indicators and follow that. Many a times we have come across forms. Often at times when we are filling the forms, we realize like this does not provide us the options, the data that we want to fill. Its options are such that they are a poorly designed form will also result in a bad data. Eleni was talking about customer data being collected. So many a time the customer is filling the data and they do not see the right options, or they do not understand what the question is, being asked in the form. So that can also result in data errors. Communication is key here. In the last session, some of my colleagues were talking about, different departments having different definitions. So communication is a key between, say, IT and the business. So if the user and the IT department is having a good communication, they can share information with each other. That becomes a key perspective, in fact, to maintain or manage data quality. And then there is technology. We have used a lot of technology in my past organization for data quality, say completeness of the forms. You cannot move on to the next page, which many of the websites you must have seen. You cannot move on to the next page unless you have completely filled the entire information. But you can also use machine learning and AI for checking the correctness of the data. So biometrics, facial recognition, things like that, data profiling tools. They help you in managing the quality of the data. So these are proactive, measures that organizations can take for data quality. Data cleansing and scrubbing is of course there, but instead of firefighting after a problem has arisen, it is better that you take proactive measures. Now, I want to ask my peers here, what in their experience have been the sources of, have they faced any examples, if they can share any examples where they saw a data quality issue, what were the sources and how that was addressed? With Abhijit.
Yeah, so now I have been handling data for over 15 years. In my view, I can categorize them into 4 key categories, and each one needs a separate kind of attention. The first is a systemic error, which is data error generated through the systems. Usually what happens is most of the systems are implemented keeping in mind the finance department in view. So all the data rolls up to the financial statements. and when any other department is using them, they get errors, and these are consistent errors because there is a problem with this how system configures the data. So the best way is the business which is using it should identify where the error is. They should give a logic to the IT department, and that systemic error would be corrected for the past and for the future. The second, which is the most important, is the data entry error that you were talking about. And there are two kinds of error. One is intentional, one is non-intentional. Intentional error are difficult to catch and correct. A lot of AI algorithms need to be in place to catch the intentional errors which are creeping in. Unintentional errors you can handle them with proper processes and checks in place. Yeah? Because these are manual entries, you live with certain amount of error, and that is where statistics comes in. If you see your error percentage going beyond certain level, how much can you tolerate, how much you cannot tolerate, etc. The third is the data management errors, which is extremely important, because what happens is, and especially in banks or telecom, there are codes for every operation, every action. If there is no management in place or rules in place that who is able to alter the definition of the data, then what happens over a period of time, you're sitting on a garbage. And it takes a lot of manual scavenging of the data and cleaning of the data to get it in place to be used. And again, that is something which has to be handled from a data management policies perspective rather than anything else, and a strict vigilance. The fourth is the system integration error. Extremely rare, but it creeps in. So what happens is, when you are upgrading a system, or when two departments are merging, or you are merging two companies, because these two companies have very different data structures, data objectives, if there is no involvement from the business while integration, then you end up having a combined database of huge number of errors. So that is the most difficult one. In my view, what we have done is, before the integration happens, you design what is going to be the state of data after the merger. You clean that and bring individual databases in that format, and then merge. Once the merger happens, then you are sitting in a situation which is chaos. And we all know it is much more difficult to clean a chaos than something which I know I have grown up with. So these are the four kind of errors.
Abhijit, just one thing. In organization, I have seen in terms of data synergy, function doesn't talk in the similar fashion with the other function. Because of that, there are a lot of inconsistencies happens within the function of the organization. Like, for example, sales with the finance marketing with operation with the audit with the HR. So isn't that you need to first build up a common framework?
Absolutely.
Organization, so that I may be having a very good quality data, but this data is of no use to you. My
Absolutely.
way of data is not coherent. You are not able to interpret the data at all.
Absolutely.
Isn't that
Absolutely.
at the organization level, you need to create a framework?
Absolutely.
And if that be so, then who's the owner of that? Is that the function?
What happens, Sandeep, is, just imagine a situation that you form a committee within an organization to manage the washrooms in the organization, and there is no female in that committee. You will never be able to get the perspective of that female toilets that you are trying to clean. So it is extremely important that data is a common resource across organization. Whenever you form a data management committee, whether it has representation from all the user groups, and you completely understand the data flow across departments, is what is going to determine that what is the quality of data you are looking at.
So the first framework is to create a data management committee, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we have a discussion point. That is a complete discussion topic in itself.
I'm trying to lead to that topic.
Yeah. So do we have time to continue discussion? Should we move on to the next topic, Sandeep?
Yep. So the next one, is who owns the data quality?
I think Bashir is. I'll hand it over to Bashir then to take on the next topic.
All right. So Avajit has already said there need to be a data committee. Traditionally, you put your data onto an IT system. Therefore, intuitively, the IT owns that data quality, which is not fair for the IT because any misinterpreted data or lack of data accuracy will lead the business to massive losses, and then the IT would complain. So the relationship between the IT and the business, with all its facets, it is the source of tension in many organizations, especially in relation to data management. This tension often manifests itself in the definition of data quality, as already alluded to in the first two topics, as well as the question of who is responsible for data quality. In my view, and I believe in any current view, both IT and the business need to be on the same team here with regards to data quality for the organization's sake. And that's where the data quality committee comes in, or data governance quality committee comes in. There is also the superhero of the 20th century, is the chief data officer. This individual has helped both IT and business with managing data and its quality in more than one form, where he sits right in the middle between the IT and the business, and he helps both understand each other's point of view. He's kind of more like a mitigator of the issues that can happen. At the very end of the day, the business need to define what constitutes high quality or acceptable data, and that the business should own the data. However, IT is typically the owner, as I already said, of the system that houses such data. A mutual understanding needs to work, and it's very beneficial for the IT to have a better understanding of data content so as to ensure a higher level of quality data. That's in a nutshell, trying to explain the relationship of who owns what. IT owns the system that houses the data. Business processes defines how that data is placed in the system. The IT again needs to understand where errors can seep in to this data entry, and somehow, with their understanding, mitigate it.
Eleni, what's your take
Yes.
on the data quality?
Yes, I absolutely agree with Bashir. I have seen few, maybe very few organizations that they have a dedicated department. They call it data quality department or data ownership department, and they are responsible for the data quality of the organization. And of course, there they need the collaboration of the business and the IT, as Bashir just mentioned. But this happens in very few organizations, and this is the ideal. Majority of the organizations, they don't have a dedicated department to manage the data quality. So there are very often fights between IT, between business. No, I prefer this data to prioritize to fix. No, the other data, the risk says the other data I want to prioritize, as we said before. So in this case, it's a little more complicated when there is not a dedicated department. And mainly I have seen the business owns it somehow because it affects them more. So maybe it affects everybody, but they believe it affects them more. So then they try to own it and correct as much as they can. In my opinion, if you want to have a good result, you need to have a dedicated team who will be responsible for the data quality. Otherwise, there will be always issues.
Dr. Pragati, what's your take?
I mean, I do agree that both business and IT, they need to find a common ground for, with respect to addressing data quality issues. But then there is one more entity based on my experience, which is many of the organizations do not create their own data, and it's some third, they're taking data from someone else. So someone else is collecting data from them. So that entity also needs to be taken into consideration when we're talking about on whom the onus lies for data quality. So as I talked about, when you're involving third party, then you're, what kind of guidelines you have for the third party, and your contract with the third party is going to play an important role here. So you will be monitoring the third party. So there needs to be clear standards and guidelines that need to be provided to the third party about the completeness of the data or correctness of the data. Because as I mentioned in my first slide, otherwise that can lead to, the third party cutting corners for short-term profit making, in order to and in their short-sightedness, will continue to provide you with bad data, and which may take, many times you realize that data is bad way later, by the time it has done much damage to your organization. So that third party who's the data collector is also needs to be considered here. In fact, in my not only in the government, where the third party were private organizations collecting data in the field, but even in the manufacturing organization, in the MNC that I was working for, we received data related to obsolescence of parts which we were using in our products from third parties, and there are international standards that guide the organizations, that they have to inform the OEMs have to inform their clients, their customers, about a part being discontinued or being obsoleted. Consider airlines, for example. They maintain a huge inventory of parts that might go discontinued or get obsoleted. So if that kind of information is not provided to the organization on a timely manner by the third party, who's supposed to be providing this information, that can lead to huge losses. Manufacturing may be sitting in your shop floors for months if the data, the part number has not been received, because then you need to test the part number, to get it through your research and development, and then use the new part number or find a replacement for it. So yeah, the third party is also, there's a third party angle also, apart from the business and IT.
Thank you, Dr. Pragati. Now this takes us to the next point.
So before we end this discussion, I just wanted to bring in two key important points. Now, data is a very special resource, we can understand. It has a varied user system. And I think the user is the best owner of the data. And that is why the IT itself has brought in concepts like there is a data lake, there is a data warehouse. These two are the infrastructure that is created for the resource that is data. And definitely IT is responsible for that. But you can understand that resource is used in various formats in various places.
Yep.
So every business department should engage themselves in creation of their individual data marts. And when they create their own data mart, the quality of the data mart is the ownership of the user group. So if I'm creating a data mart for the marketing team, the data definitions, data structure, the data flows should be the prerogative of the marketing department. And similarly, it is for the HR department, for the finance department, because they are the best ones to understand how they want the data and what kind of data they want. It may be fetched from the base systems like the data lakes or data warehouse. But without the involvement of the user group, you really can't define the ownership. It's like I have a prime minister, but still you have different ministries to take care of each individual function. It is the same case with data. It has to be a distributed ownership of the data that we are talking about.
Thanks, Abhijit. So we move on to the next topic, which is Alina's favorite, best data management practices. All yours.
Yes. Exactly. So Depending on the sector, as we said, everything is relative on the data. There are some best practices that an organization can follow to protect their data quality. Speaking for the financial sector and the banking sector, where I have mainly my experience, I will mention some very basic practices that are in place so as to protect the data quality of the banks. And relatively speaking, comparing to other organizations, the banks have a high percentage of good quality data. Of course, not 100%, but a high percentage. Uh, for example, one very important thing for the banks is that the customers, when they come in the bank and they need to open an account or they need to take a loan, a finance, or any other banking product, they need to provide proof of documents so as to show that their data, their ID is accurate and real. So they have to provide Emirates ID, they have to provide passport. So in that case, this is a very good source because the source is valid and accurate. The employees take photocopies of these passports and the Emirates IDs, and the data they enter in the system, we know they come from a truth, a real source, so they are accurate. So proof with documents of the data accuracy, I would say, is the number one that protects in the first contact with the customer, the data quality. The second practice which protects the data quality of the bank is there are very good and very detailed processes in place of what data need to be collected, in what format they need to be, and in which systems they need to be entered. So all the employees, they have some processes where the bank says these are the processes, these are the policies, and these you need to follow. The third one is training. They provide very good training to the frontline staff, to the frontline employees, who are the ones responsible to collect data from the customers. So the frontline employees, they have very good training periodically, maybe every quarter or every 6 months, on how to collect the data, what data they need to enter, in which systems. The fourth one, I would say, to summarize, is the systems protect the users. So they have put in the systems automated rules to check if the data that the employees enter are correct. To give you one example, for example, someone needs to enter the mobile number. The mobile number field has specific, as a rule backend, specific number of digits that can accept. It cannot accept 15 digits. That's a wrong mobile number. So it gives an alert to the employee, an error alert that something you have entered wrong there. Or if someone enters an email ID and the email address hasn't got the at or hasn't got the .com or the dot something, the system will give error alert. So the system has programmed backend some rules to protect the front-end users of making mistakes. A fifth one is the operations team, a backend team, does ongoing and everyday manual checks to make sure that there are no discrepancies. There are no discrepancies in the application entered in the system and in the documents of the passport or the Emirates ID or any other documents that the customer gave us physical documents. So it's a team behind that ongoing they check physical documents and electronic data if there are discrepancies, and if there are, they try to solve them. A sixth point that is in place and very important for any organization is periodical data checks and reports to check your data and the quality of your data. And of course, these data checks and reports can be different for the business or the sales department, can be different for the risk department, can be different for the financial department, but they can have checks and they can have reports on what data they want to monitor and what is the quality of their data. So they can see these reports and then take decisions and accordingly act to correct this data. Some of this data can be corrected automatically, and some other data we have to communicate, we have to contact the customer to ask him which one is the correct data. So periodical data checks and reports is very important, and actions to be taken to correct the data of the organization. All these things are in place overall, not 100%, but they are in place in the banking sector, and this protects mainly their data to be in a good stage, I could say, as of quality. If we don't want to talk about the financial sector, and to give a very, very simple example, another best practice of checking the data quality is the digital stores. The digital stores, when you subscribe and you create an account, when you enter your email address as a username, they send you an email to verify your email address. This is a good trick to check and make sure that the email you provided is correct. So there are a lot of best practices an organization can follow to make sure somehow, either in the front line, on the first point with the data collection, or later on with checks, their data can be in a good level of quality. What is your opinion? This goes based on my experience. Abhijit, based on your experience, I know you also have a lot of experience on these topics. Are there any other best practices that maybe other companies can follow to make sure that they have rules in place for data quality?
See, really, what I have observed is, I don't know about the best practices, but there is one malpractice which leads to a lot of data problems in an organization. And what I have observed is documentation is that malpractice. Because we don't maintain proper documentation, it leads to a lot of problems. The first problem I'll tell, and when I'm talking about data documentation, there are three aspects of it. One, have I ever put down in paper what is the process flow in the organization?
The policies,
how the
yes.
processes flow? It is a biosphere. Organization doesn't function in silos. Below the process flow, is there a data flow happening? So what data marketing passes on to HR, what data HR passes on to finance, so on and so forth. And below that, what are the reports we are generating? If three things are documented, then we can avoid two things. One, whenever a system is implemented, because we don't have documentation, we depend on the documentation provided by the system providers. Now we are getting into that trap, because now they sell it as best practices across the world. We don't realize that each organization has its own DNA. The more we try to fit ourselves to somebody else's design, the more we are prone to errors from every front. The second, if there are no process flows, data flows, or data structures in place, you cannot have a governing policy over that. If these documentations are taken care of, you can both address errors originating at the implementation level and at a usage level. Very simple. We have been talking in marketing that you understand the user first and then define your policies and processes around that. If I don't understand the user and I don't document it, the errors are bound to creep in.
Yeah. Exactly. You are absolutely right. The processes are very important and the policies and the processes and the data flows to be in place. Dr. Pragati, when you assigned to third party for data collection, did you face any data challenges there? Data quality challenges?
Yes, we did all kinds of data quality challenges, like starting from incompleteness to correctness of the data. But we had several strict measures implemented through technology, as I was mentioning. Like there were automated checks in the system where the operator could not collect the next set of data unless they completed the first set of data. So unless they completed the demographics, they could not move on to collect the biometrics. And then with biometrics also, we had certain checks like has the operator attempted certain number of times and spent a certain amount of time in capturing that data. So they cannot just say that it's not possible to collect the fingerprints of this person, move on to the next. No, the screen stopped prevented the operator from moving to the next screen before spending a certain amount of time on that particular screen, so he could not hurry. There's no time to hurry here. And then they have to spend a certain amount of time, they have to make certain number of attempts to collect the data, and only then they can move on to the next item for data collection.
Very good.
So there were several checks implemented through the system itself for data quality. But one of the things that I want to mention here is related to audit trail. When you're managing your data, audit trail is also very important. Basically your metadata, who is the author of the data, describe the data field, description of the data field, when was this data collected, why was this data collected. So that kind of information, if you manage for every field, that means when you have to correct or make and go back and revisit any point of your data collection, it's very easy for you to make changes and see what can be the implications for making those changes. So maintaining an audit trail is a very important aspect of data management or data quality.
Very true. Yes, you're absolutely right. And I agree with you 100%. The audit trail is very important to have an audit and monitor. Very good. We can move on to.
All right.
Doctor, is there anything else we would like to add on the best data management practices? Please feel free.
So now, when we move to the next one, this reminds me of this, this Dilbert, and the quality. It says, "Are you sure the data you gave me is correct?" It says, "I have been giving you incorrect data for years. This is the first time you have asked." What? I said the data is totally accurate. Now the next topic is about the quality. So the quality, Dr. Pragati.
Yes, data quality.
Yeah,
right. So can you pull up my slide? I have one slide here. Yeah, so I think the slide is a little light, but what I wanted to highlight here is that there are three aspects of big data. Like it has a large volume. The data is collected at a high speed, like there are millions of terabytes of data being collected every second or minute or day in any organization. And then the data has a lot of variety as well. So it's not just the volume and the speed at which the data is being collected, but also a lot of variety. It's not just a clean, structured data, a quantitative field or a number, but the data types can be video data. It can be a handwritten note by a physician, or it can be your social media chats, etc. So the data types are structured as well as unstructured, and they are from multiple sources. These are some of the characteristics of big data which make data quality even more challenging. So one is the challenge to store the data, but at the same time there is a challenge of computing data for computing as well, for data analysis, etc. Now, if we talk about because of the volume, most of your data quality measurements, they will not be in absolute terms. It will not be 50% data quality or 70% data quality. Most of them are going to be as approximations. So you will be talking about data quality in terms of probability or confidence intervals. So that is one of the aspects of data quality here. And then it may be an oxymoron, but here we have a large amount of data available in big data, but then still we may not have the data that we are looking for. So data availability, believe it or not, can be a problem in big data as well. You may think that there's huge amount of data, but the data that you were looking for, that might not be available for various constraints because of different reasons. And then because this is a large volume of data, it will be in multiple databases. So what you have to do here is what becomes of enormous importance here is referential integrity. How do you reference between these various databases? So data governance, data pipeline design, these things become extremely important in data quality in case of big data. We've lost the slide. Okay, then and when we're talking about velocity, then there is because of the speed of at which you're getting the data, the data quality assessments you'll be doing it on the fly. So you're still receiving the data is still coming, data is still being stored, and you're still doing data quality assessments. There is no time to wait and get all the data, store it at a place, and then process your data and perform your analysis. So you are in fact analyzing as you're receiving the data. And what is worse is that by the time you have analyzed your data, it is already outdated. So the speed at which the data is coming by millions of terabytes of data within seconds, your analysis is getting obsolete at the same speed. So what you can do is you can do a sampling, or you can have a small sample of data and do the analysis based on that to make it faster. But then sampling introduces bias in your results because it's not representative. It may not be representative of the entire set of data. So some of the things that organizations have resorted to is they have automated regression testing. So every time any changes are made to the data, the functionality tests. So suppose there are changes in the code, the functionality tests for of all that everything else is in place, like everything is functioning as it was functioning before, that can be automated. So those are some of the things that organizations are doing. And then, as I said, because of the large variety of data from different data sources, there are semantic differences. One may be defining, one data source may be defining a particular set of data in a different manner than the other. Even dates. Someone is capturing date as date, month, year, and another is capturing month, date, year. And there are so many semantic differences that may be available between this various data types, video data versus text data versus numbers versus, So there comes a need to separately define data quality for all these different types of data. Then that is another challenge. So you need to define separate data quality metrics for each type of data. And so again, what becomes important here is data pipeline design, data traceability, metadata. Now, one thing that I want to mention here before I move on to my colleagues for their views is that data quality here, because many a times we are using machine learning and AI to ensure data quality or the predictive models in case of big data. Data quality becomes extremely important because here we are getting, if there is a poor data quality, we have a double trouble. Because we are using a poor quality historic data for training our systems for making predictions and training our models for predictions, and those predictions are not going to be correct if your input data was incorrect. So your machine learning, your AI is not going to be performing optimally because of the historically poor data that you have fed into it for training the system. And then further, the new data is also poor, and that means you're further worsening the system for future predictions. So there's a double trouble here with machine learning and AI being used in big data. So now I open the floor for my other colleagues to pitch in about their views about data quality.
Sandeep, your mic is muted.
Yeah, we have got 2 minutes to wrap it up.
So, there is one good thing about big data, that volume of data is only produced either through systems, like Engineer Bashir would tell. Telecom towers are one source of huge amount of data. So there can be systemic errors which can be corrected. The other is the unstructured data that comes from social media. That is a huge amount of data, but then the process of collecting and processing the data is AI based. So A/B testing before implementation or before going live on the big data is extremely important. And if the meticulous A/B testing is done, then we would be able to avoid errors in when we go live on the big data. I would like to hear before we wrap up.
Abhijit, you have taken us on a very heavy mode, so let me make it a little lighter with the Dilbert. Okay, this is about what it says about the big data. Do we have any actionable analytics from our big data in the cloud. That says, yes, the data shows that my productivity plunges whenever you learn new jargon. Maybe in the memory of computing will accelerate your application. Engineering Bashir, make it lighter. You are you.
Everything big data quality and data quality management is so critical that if you are basing your decisions on it, it better be as accurate as you can. You need to have policies, governance, systems in place to ensure data input is as accurate as possible. Data aggregation and data collection is done in a systematic, clear way where every data column or every data set is labeled correctly, is identified correctly, and there is one definition for every single element of that data. For example, if you're talking about speed, are we talking about miles an hour, kilometers an hour, meters per second? You have to define it across the organization. Otherwise, you're going to have different formats or different results because you're using the data differently. So big data quality has to be governed through systematized and very clear processes across the organization.
Eleni,
Is that enough?
thank you, Engineering Bashir. Eleni, could you wrap it up today's discussion talk, please?
Yes. So good data quality in big data is a must. To say it in simple words, when you need to do an analysis and you have 500 records and they have not good data quality, you see, and one by one you can even fix them or correct them with your hand and then continue your analysis. But when you are talking about 1 billion records, you cannot continue. It's a showstopper. So you need to have good data quality. You need to follow the best practices of data management to have good data quality.
Thank you, Eleni, for wrapping up. Thank you, all the panel speakers. So today we saw a new topic and we heard from all the speakers about good data and versus the bad data. And we had the views from all across the world. We had US, Europe, Middle East, and Asia. So next time we're going to have another topic on the same series, analytics and business. We'll come bring to you another interesting topic. Till that time, Assalamu alaikum. Bye bye. Good night. Bon nuit. And see you.